Elias Hart lived a quiet life on his Arizona ranch, where the only sounds most days were wind against cedar trees and horses shifting in the corral. He never expected anything unusual that evening, and certainly not the kind of trouble that walked toward him from across the dusty horizon. As he finished tying off the last gate, he noticed two small figures approaching. At first, he thought they were shadows cast by the fading sun. But as they stumbled closer, he saw two Apache children barely holding themselves upright, clothes torn, faces gray with exhaustion and fear. Elias dropped what he was doing and rushed toward them. The older one, a boy, maybe 11, tried to stand tall, but his legs shook. The younger girl held his hand tightly, her small steps dragging. They looked like they had been walking for hours under the unforgiving desert heat. He knelt beside them, offering a gentle hand instead of questions. The boy blinked at him with tired suspicion before finally allowing Elias to support him. The girl reached out without hesitation, clinging to his shirt as if afraid the world might swallow her whole if she let go even for a moment. Inside the barn, Elias guided them to a water bucket and lifted the ladle to their lips. They drank in small, shaky gulps, the kind people take after going too long without safety or rest. Elias kept his voice quiet, knowing loud concern would only frighten them more. After they drank, he noticed the way their shoulders drooped, their trembling increasing with each breath. They were beyond tired. They were ready to collapse. So he brought them inside his small home and pointed toward his own bed, offering it without thinking twice. They looked too fragile to argue. The children hesitated at the doorway, exchanging a silent glance, as if asking one another whether they could trust this strange rancher. But their exhaustion won. The girl climbed into the bed first, curling into the blankets, while the boy stood by the bedside, fighting sleep with sheer, stubborn will. Elias gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and told him it was all right. Slowly, the boy allowed himself to sit, then lie down beside his sister. As soon as their heads touched the pillow, their eyes softened, fear mixing with gratitude neither of them had words for. When Elias moved to adjust the blanket, the boy grabbed his wrist. His voice cracked when he whispered, "Pa, he got separated from us." Elias felt a cold heaviness settle in his chest at those words, the kind that told him this wasn't simple wandering. They were running from something. He told them they were safe, promising he would help them find their father. The girl mumbled something in a language he didn't understand before drifting into sleep, her hand still holding her brother's tightly. Elias watched them, feeling protective in a way he hadn't expected. He stepped outside to give them quiet, closing the door softly behind him. The sun had nearly disappeared, leaving long shadows stretching across the land. Elias stared toward the ridge, thinking only of how far two children must have traveled to end up at his doorstep. But even as he tried to make sense of it, the uneasy feeling in his gut told him something else was coming, something bigger. He stood there listening, wind, horses, settling dust, but underneath it all he sensed movement beyond the ridge. And he realized he may have invited more into his home than just two lost children. The sky was still pale when Elias stepped outside, the cold morning air biting at his skin. He had only lifted his axe once when a deep rumble moved through the ground. It wasn't thunder. It was too steady, too heavy. Elias turned toward the ridge and felt his breath catch. A line of riders appeared, rising like ghosts from the morning sun. Their silhouettes sharpened as they approached, Apache warriors, their horses moving with absolute unity. Feathers, paint, rifles and spears glinted in the dawn light. Elias had seen scouting groups before. He had never seen anything like this. One rider led them, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in decorated leather that marked him as someone of great authority. His hair flowed behind him, and his eyes were the kind that measured everything and missed nothing. Elias knew instantly this man wasn't just a warrior. He was a leader, The riders stopped in a perfect line, dust swirling around their hooves. Elias felt the weight of 150 eyes narrowing on him. Every instinct told him to raise his hands, step back, explain himself, but his feet refused to move. He stood frozen, axe still in hand, breath tight. The chief dismounted with quiet power, each step heavy enough to silence the entire yard. His gaze swept across the ranch, the corral, the house. Elias swallowed hard, hoping the children were still sleeping and wouldn't wake to fear. But the chief found what he sought quickly, his eyes fixed on the small window where two little faces peeked out, faces that belonged to him. Elias watched the change wash over the man's expression. The steel in his eyes softened, replaced by something deeper, relief so profound it nearly collapsed his posture. When he turned back to Elias, gratitude and threat balanced in his voice. "You sheltered what is mine," he said, each word deliberate. Elias couldn't tell if he was being thanked or warned, so he simply nodded. He hadn't done it for reward. He'd acted because the children needed help. The Apache warriors behind the chief lowered their rifles and spears in a single fluid motion. The sight was overwhelming, a wave of deadly strength suddenly made peaceful. Elias finally forced himself to breathe, air filling his lungs like he'd been underwater far too long. The chief stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the dirt until it reached Elias's boots. "For this," he said quietly, "my people owe you." Elias felt the truth in those words. It wasn't a casual promise. Among the Apache, such a vow was a bond stronger than law. The door creaked behind them as the two children burst outside, running straight to their father. The chief dropped to his knees and pulled them close, his usually fierce demeanor breaking into something tender. Elias looked away, feeling he was witnessing something sacred. When the chief rose again, he placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. It was heavy but not threatening. "If ever you are in need," he said, "call for us, and we will come." Elias nodded, unsure how to respond to such a powerful pledge. Then with a whistle, the chief signaled his warriors. They mounted, forming a protective circle around the family. The chief lifted his daughter onto his horse, the boy climbing behind him. Before leaving, he looked back once more, offering Elias a final nod of respect. The thunder of hooves slowly faded across the plains, leaving Elias alone again in the early morning stillness. He exhaled, steadying himself against the porch rail, realizing how close he had come to disaster, and how unexpectedly he had found honor instead. He hadn't just offered a bed to two exhausted children. Without knowing it, he had earned the loyalty of a nation, and as the sun climbed higher, Elias felt the land around him somehow different, wider, safer, and forever changed by the lives that crossed it.